Hello, wonderful parents, and welcome to our special episode today where we're going to be talking about unlocking your child's voice and empowering them to speak up. If you ever worried that your child is being too quiet in class, not asking questions, or feeling overlooked, you are definitely in the right place. So we've got quite a number of issues where parents come to us and they reach out to us, right? So the common issues that we face so far is they say, oh, anak saya sangat pemalu lah sebenarnya. So when the teacher asks questions, what happened is the child is so shy. So dia tak berjaya nak bagi jawapan and the cikgu dah pass on to the next student. So eventually the girl learns that, oh, okay, as long as I keep quiet, they won't bother me anymore. So this is one of the issues that parents have faced. Maybe this is your issue as well. Then the next issue that we always hear when we want to talk about empowering children, right, is that when the child actually braces themselves or actually volunteers themselves to ask a question, the teacher just shoots them down. Oh, what a stupid question. Macam tu pun ada. So parents very hurt lah. Anak saya nak belajar tapi cikgu buat macam ni. And then there's also, I think, pada pandangan saya lah, my own personal opinion, this is the worst, where the teacher says, oh, why do you want to know that? That's not in the syllabus. Tak payah tahu. So it really kills the curiosity of the child. And I think that is one of the worst things lah, bagi pandangan saya. And then, of course, yang ni paling controversial, budak tu tanya soalan sebab dia betul nak belajar, but cikgu rasa tercabar, cikgu rasa macam, ush, dia cakap, oh, kalau you pandai sangat, pergilah cari sendiri, because it mencabar ego cikgu tu lah. Cikgu tu tak tahu. Instead of just saying that saya tak tahu, jom look together, let's research this, let's find this together, they just end up saying, okay, kalau pandai sangat kau lah cari. Dia macam tu pun ada. So these are the issues that we face. So if any of this seems familiar or you have had a variation of this sort of cases, this episode is going to be really, really useful for you. So what are we going to cover in today's episode? Let me walk you through that first. Now, before we go into the meat of the episode, right, before we start and look into what we're going to learn today, we first need to understand three things, right? What are the three things we need to understand even before we go into the episode? First, we need to understand what is the importance of asking questions in learning. What is the importance of actually empowering our children to speak up? So pada pandangan saya lah ya, kalau the parents themselves don't understand, don't know what is the importance of the child asking questions, how can this help the child, then dia akan kata tak payahlah, it's okay lah, cikgu suruh diam, you diam je lah, cikgu suruh memorize, you memorize je lah, kenapa? Why you want to make this a big deal, right? So this can be one of the issues lah. So before we get into the subject matter of today, we want to understand the importance of learning, asking questions in learning. Now, once we have done that, we want to also understand what is the difference between constructive response and dismissive behavior. Okay, ni penting ni sangat penting, especially dunia social media sekarang. So sekarang ni semua orang ambil je, you open the conversation dia terus. Biasalah cikgu zaman sekarang tak passionate, bukan macam cikgu zaman dulu. Sekarang semua nak makan gaji buta je. Normal, right? These are the things we hear. But the thing is, sometimes you need to know whether the teacher is truly being dismissive or is it the teacher is giving a constructive response. Okay, saya bagi example lah ya. This happens commonly in my class as well. So students kadang-kadang tanya soalan yang merapu-rapu. Ya, dia memang merapu lah soalan dia because they didn't focus, they didn't pay attention. So what we do when students ask these kind of questions is we tell them, okay, can you clarify your question? Why are you asking this question? What do you actually want to know? Now, this is very important because some students feel like they should just ask questions for the sake of it. So at Pass Excel, we have had students from over 23 countries, right? So when we have students, especially from South Asia, let's say Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, this region, yeah, because I think they value, culturally, they value asking questions so much in class that the students will just ask questions for the sake of asking, even though it has no context, so they can seem smart in class. So when a teacher does this, when the teacher say, clarify your question, what is the reason you're asking? So that means the teacher is actually giving constructive response. Cikgu tu nak you fikir secara mendalam. So that's what we're going to look at lah. So that not everything is the teacher's fault or the teacher's not doing a good job. So we want to know what's the difference between constructive response and dismissive behavior. And then lastly, we want to understand what is the nature of dismissive behavior, how to identify this. Now, only after we've learned these three things can we move into the meat of today's episode. So what is the meat of today's episode? The meat of today's episode is we're going to look at the psychological impact on the student, right? We're going to look at the psychological impact on the students. Then, under psychological impact, bawah payung psychological impact to or under the psychological impact umbrella, we're going to look at how does this impact the child's confidence. We're going to look at how does it impact the child's learning motivation, because this is different. And then lastly, we're going to look at emotional and social effect. How does this affect a child emotionally and socially, and what are some of the long-term consequences on the child because of the teacher's dismissive behavior. So under psychological impact, we're going to look at about 4 things here. Okay. Now, after we've done psychological impact, we are then going to move on. And of course, dah tengok impact, dah tengok kesan, kita nak tahu cara nak menangani masalah ni kan. So we are going to look at the tips, strategies, what are some of the routines you can do to actually empower and advocate your child. Okay, so when we say we want to empower your child and we want to teach them advocacy so that they can advocate for themselves, they can stand up for themselves. Now, when we say that, kita bukan nak cakap kita nak jadi macam American lah. Kita bukan nak kata, okay, let's be like woke culture, right? Now, semua pun sekarang nak jadi woke, where everybody else is wrong, you are right. This is not what we want. But what we want is for them to be able to stand up for themselves, because, you know, as parents, we cannot accompany our children everywhere, right? We cannot follow them into the workplace later. We cannot follow them into their marriage later. Hopefully lah, janganlah buat macam ni. And also, of course, we can't even follow them into schools, into classrooms, right? So how do we know our children will be able to stand up for themselves, be strong, be resilient when we are not there? How can they? That's what we mean by advocacy. So we're not teaching them like, okay, cari gaduh dengan cikgu ke, jadi biadab dengan cikgu ke. No, we want them to stand up for themselves, hopefully dengan sopan santun, budi bahasa, and without hurting anyone lah, hopefully without dismissing or making anybody else feel less of themselves. So that's what we want to cover there. So under strategies for empowerment, we want to cover a few things, which is ideas for overcoming dismissive behavior. We want to reinforce self-worth, and eventually we want to teach children how to seek support when these things happen. Right? So there are 3 things we're going to cover under strategy. And lastly, we're going to cover how do we do this here at Pass Excel, because this is a topic that is very close to heart to me and also all the teachers here. Like I told you before, we get a lot of these questions from parents who want to enroll and parents who are, surveying. They always ask us this kind of questions. So we thought like, okay, let's educate the parents. So as you can see, today's episode got lots of layers, lots of meat, and it's going to be a long episode. So let's dive right in. All right, so let's get started. So like I said just now, before we go into the meat of today's topic, we first need to know what is the importance of asking questions. Because biasalah kat Malaysia ni kan, I hear it very often, with parents. It's okay lah, cikgu kan pandai, dengar lah cakap cikgu. Jangan mencelah. Jangan mencelah. Don't keep interrupting the teacher, when the teacher says, just listen and just remember and memorize what the teacher says. It's very common. So, the problem is, I think we have a misconception about how learning happens. So, kita ingat, how learning happens is, okay, kita duduk dalam kelas, kita dengar, and then we sort of masuk ke dalam kepala, sumbat dalam kepala, and then eventually we become smart. Or I guess this is what most people think lah. The way learning happens is actually very active. So the more actively engaged you are with the material, the better the learning or the higher the quality of learning is. Now, what is the best way to engage with the material? That's right, asking questions. Now, first, before you want to even encourage your children to speak up or ask questions, I think you need to be very convinced about how does these questions actually help your children. Okay, so let's look at step 1. So the step 1 is how, when we ask question, it improves memory. Okay, so let me try to present this to you. When you ask question, what happens is there's a part of your brain called hippocampus. So this is not just for storing memory, it's also for retrieving memory. So meaning in situations, let's say I studied something and I need the information again. Usually, let's say in exam setting, kan? If this part is activated, and then retrieval becomes easier as well compared to just memorizing. So that's number one. Number two, when you ask questions, your ability to problem solve in other areas and becoming more creative is also on the rise. It increases. Why? Because people who train themselves to ask questions, they look at a problem and then they realize, this is something that not right. What can I do? How can I fix this? These questions come. But masalahnya, in our education system, since we don't encourage this actively, we discourage this, or at least don't encourage it actively, orang dengar je lah. People become very passive, right? Now, number three, social learning and emotional intelligence. Okay, this develops as well when you ask questions. How? Okay, classroom is a social setting, betul? So when you ask questions, or better yet, when a classmate asks a question, you are listening. So you are able to learn in a social environment. That's number one. When you ask questions, other people can learn, and when other people ask questions, you can learn. So this is social learning. Okay, that's okay. But the most important part, emotional intelligence. Why does this happen when you ask questions? What do you think? Can you type it out in the comment section? Okay, let me share with you. So when the classmate was asking question, you are listening, right? So when you listen, what happens? You now know, oh, okay, orang tu faham macam ni sebenarnya. Like, their perspective is so completely different than mine. I didn't even think that we can look at it this way. So what happens is it increases empathy, it increases your emotional intelligence, and most importantly, it opens you up to different perspectives, which is why learning in a group is very effective, you know. Now, number four, when you continuously ask questions, it is going to boost your confidence because you have a positive experience with asking questions and learning, and then your confidence is going to improve. If all this doesn't convince you, right? Now, let's talk about the brain chemical called dopamine. Now, you know, when do most people get dopamine hits? Okay, the natural ones is if you exercise, you go out in the sunlight and everything. But the not so natural one is when they call it cheap dopamine lah, when you scroll on social media. Now, what is this dopamine? Dopamine is an enjoyment feeling, you know, like when it hits, it's a joy feeling, right? So most people get this dopamine hits when they go shopping or they eat really good food. Now, kids get this dopamine hit, or even us get this dopamine hit when we actually ask questions, right? So when we ask questions, the happiness from discovering something new, from learning something new, makes the learning experience so enjoyable for children. Now, as parents, I think that's what we want. We want them to actually enjoy learning so that they can continuously learn for the rest of their life, right? If all this doesn't convince you, there's another important reason why they should ask questions. It's called cognitive load lah. So we want to reduce this cognitive load. What is cognitive load? Cognitive load is just a fancy way of saying that your brain is overwhelmed. So bila kita dengar, kita tak tahu nak sumbat macam mana tahu. Kita tak tahu macam mana nak atur the information in our head. So when you ask questions, you now are able to categorize. Oh, this means this means that. And we can arrange it in our head. So that is cognitive load. Now, the most important one that I think is here lah, two things. One, it encourages them to become more curious. Like I said, oh, why is this like this? Huh? Why is it like that? So it makes them very curious so they can continue to learn. And this continuing to learn, it creates neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is our brain's ability to continuously connect neurons, continually, form these linkages and become smarter and better lah. So that means there's no one point where our children will stop growing, at least mentally. Asking question promotes this. So I think as parents, this is a fantastic reason why we should want our children to actually want to ask questions. Now, hopefully, this has convinced you on why it is so important for children to speak up, ask questions, and learn in this manner, right? Now, since we already known this, we already know, okay, so they must ask questions lah. before we go into the subject matter, we want to know what are the ways that a teacher can dismiss a student's question, or how can a teacher buat, like, what is their dismissive behavior so that you can spot or you can teach your children to spot this. Now, the first dismissive behavior paling common lah, I just ignore. I buat-buat tak dengar. Ni especially true if anak tuan-puan jenis yang dia memang suara kecil, very shy, and then suara pun dalam kelas tak dengar. So lagi senang lah, cikgu just dismiss. Right? Then the other one is the teacher belittles. The teacher makes fun of you. Oh, alah, takkan benda ni pun tak tahu. Benda ni pun nak kena tanya ke? Boleh Google kan? This is common. You'll be surprised how many times I've heard this from parents who say, oh, this is what the teacher said. Right? Boleh Google kan? Tak payahlah dia tanya soalan macam ni. So, it actually harms the student's confidence because they feel like, oh, and then I guess I should not be asking these questions then because I seem very silly. I should have just Googled it. Right? So, belittling the student. The third one is impatient. Oh, sorry, you cannot ask questions until I'm done, or you wait lah until next class ke, and then the teacher say wait until the end of the class. So tapi cikgu tak ajar, lepas tu kita okay class, see you in the next class or see you next week. Dia cabut. Right. Now, this is actually a trick most teachers use. Why are they so impatient? Because you need to understand. Right now, most school management, cara dia measure a teacher's performance is based on whether the teacher finishes syllabus. So what happens is the teacher then focuses on finishing the syllabus instead of whether your child understands what is being taught. Right? So if I allow for all these questions, then I'm not going to hit my KPI lah. So I just push them lah. So the teacher is like, oh, wait, impatient. The teacher is very impatient, don't want to do. Then the next thing is lack of support. Okay, so lack of support. How to explain lack of support? Okay, lack of support macam ni. So I had a student who the teacher, she asked the teacher this question. She said, oh, I don't understand. Can you explain? Then what the teacher did was the teacher repeated what she said. The teacher just repeated, this is the definition of opportunity cost, blah, 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 blah. Repeat. Then the teacher said, no, I don't understand. Then the teacher repeat again. So then the student is a student who's able to speak up from her previous school. This was her experience. So she shared. So she told the teacher, I'm not asking you to repeat. I'm asking you to explain. If I couldn't hear you, I would have said, please repeat. And the teacher lost it. The teacher lost it because the teacher felt she's attacking her. The teacher felt she was being disrespectful. So this is lack of support. The teacher doesn't encourage or form a culture of asking questions. The last one is giving negative feedback. So every time somebody asks a question in class, what the teacher does is every time negative. Kenapa tanya soalan macam ni? Okay, nantilah, tak payahlah tanya soalan macam ni. It's okay, you know what, you don't understand this anyway, you don't even understand the basics, what's the point of asking this? So every time negative feedback. Now, these are the most obvious signs, like when your child knows the teacher is being dismissive, right? Now, there is another set of teachers or another set of behaviors in teachers which are a bit more subtle. So it becomes quite hard, right, to identify whether they are being dismissive or not. Okay, so example, cikgu ni, this is a real story. If a particular race of students ask in the class, she answers. If another or any other race of students ask in class, dia tak jawab. We call this selective responsiveness lah. I mean, in our methodology, we say the teacher is selectively responsive. But kalau tanya saya, ni daripada cakap selective responsiveness, lebih baik cakap racist lah. That's one choice. Then selective responsiveness in another way. Teacher has favorites. Teacher just answers from a certain number of students, or certain student asks, she answers. Other student asks, you don't answer. So this is all selective responsiveness, which make the child get very confused. Like, what's wrong here? Why is the teacher not answering me? Is something wrong with me? Then, of course, the most common one, sarcasm and mockery. Every time you ask question, oh, you ke? So sometimes it's just framed as humor, but or they turn every question the student asks into a joke. So eventually the student feel like, okay, you know what? Maybe I should just keep quiet. This is another behavior, right? So share that with your children. Now, the other one is the teacher gives a rushed answer. So every time the child asks a question, or it's very superficial, the answer is like what I told earlier, is just a repetition. So the student doesn't even understand what is being told. Some teachers, super pro, they don't even do rush answer. They just give body language. When the student asks, stare them down, guarded body language, which means the student cannot even muster the courage to ask, right? And the last one, which I think is really, really bad, is some teachers cultivate a culture of the class being quiet, like meaning they prefer silence. Throughout, I am talking now, you don't talk. Nobody moves, nobody even breathes, right? Because they feel like you should just listen throughout my class. Now, this is a very passive form of learning, very outdated form of learning. We are not saying that the students should talk to each other, but the students should definitely engage with the teacher. I have had teachers at Pass Excel, right? Because we do one-to-one with the teachers and get to know what's their challenges on a weekly basis. So one of the one-to-ones I remember, dia datang ke I, dia kata, oh, Mr. Yuvan, I seriously don't like this class. I tanya, kenapa? The class is so quiet. Every time I present, I tanya soalan, dia orang macam like very, very quiet. They're too obedient. So they don't even engage with the material. So these are the teachers we have here, because these teachers prefer if you continuously engage with the material, continuously ask questions, because when, as a teacher, even for me, if you ask a lot of questions, I know what is your level of understanding about the material. So then I can further guide you. Now, that is how you can see if they are being dismissive or they are giving constructive responses. Now, I have a very important question for you guys who are listening here, right? Now, have any of you noticed that these behaviors are being present in your children's teachers, or your children have come back home and complained of any of these one things, or a variation, or even a combination of all these items that I've listed here? So please comment down here so we know that what is it that you're experiencing, and probably we can help you out. Now, having said that, we're going to take a short break and then move on to the next section, which is the meat of today's episode, which is we're going to talk about what are the psychological impact on the students, right? We're going to look at the four types of impacts that I mentioned just now after a short break.
My name is Muhammad Taimur. I am 14 years old and I'm from Lahore, Pakistan, and I'm a student at Pass Excel. Of my past experiences in a conventional school, like even if you ask a single question from just a little bit outside the syllabus, like you're done. They like scold you. They scold you to death, and then you like literally, because of how ashamed you are, you literally stay quiet for the entire class. You can't make mistakes. Like they literally shout at you like, why are you making mistakes? I've taught you this. Another thing was their teaching methods, especially Mr. Yuvin's and Mr. Rashad's. Like they encouraged me to actually ask questions, make mistakes, something that I've always been scared about. But this time after joining Pass Excel, I really became more of a guy who wants to learn from his mistakes rather than just staying away from them and trying to be perfect in every answer. I got really close to the teachers. I could basically talk to them about anything. They were ready to listen to basically any of my thoughts or any of my concerns, which was really good. It made me feel like I was really at home.